The stars whispered a warning to those who dared to listen. If you see a human, run. If a human sees you, pray. It does not care. The message traveled faster than official reports ever could, slipping through the cracks of war councils and backroom dealings, carried on the breath of those who survived by the thinnest margin. It was absurd on the surface. Humans were small, fragile by galactic standards. Their bones could be broken with a swipe from a Draken warrior. They could be outrun by a Varkari scout. And the Ties did not even consider them a true warrior species. Yet despite the dismissive attitude, the galaxy found itself tiptoeing around this anomaly. Carthon, a veteran enforcer for the W Syndicate, adjusted the plasma rifle slung over his back as he moved cautiously through the devastated remains of a Federation colony. The air still carried the acrid scent of burnt metal, the walls blackened by blasts, the ruins silent save for the crunch of ash underfoot. His second-in-command, a massive Zark, named Dulles, shifted uneasily beside him, speaking in a low voice. "This place is dead, so why are we here?" Carthon tapped the side of his helmet, bringing up the mission briefing across his visor. "One human was registered here. Command wants confirmation." Dulles snorted dismissively. "We both know it is either gone or worse, it is still here." Carthon said nothing, letting the memory of their last encounter on Ver9 speak for itself. They had believed that mission to be simple too. A planetary governor had crossed the Syndicate, and their assassins had been sent in to tie up loose ends. Everything went according to plan until the reports began to trickle in. One assassin missing, then another, and when they found the bodies, they almost sparked a full-scale war against humanity. It was not just that they had been killed, it was the manner of death, crude, brutal, personal. One impaled with a shard of their own armor, another suffocated by their own equipment, and the third no one dared speak about. Carthon motioned his squad forward, each operative moving with careful precision. This was no longer a cleanup, it was survival. His helmet scanner beeped. Motion detected. Dulles tensed, raising his rifle, but Carthon hushed him, narrowing his focus, a heat signature. Small humanoid. The odds screamed against it, but there it was, undeniable. A living human remained within the colony. The scanner led them to a maintenance corridor. Blood splattered along the walls. The metal scarred with crude carvings of the YB Syndicate insignia marks left by the previous team. The door ahead stood ajar, a faint pulse indicating the human waited inside. Carthon signaled his team to flank the door weapons, ready nerves taut as bowstrings. On his signal, the door slid open, revealing a scene of devastation, overturned crates, broken lights sparking fitfully. At the center, perched casually atop a crate, sat the human, young, average in build, wearing a torn Federation jumpsuit bearing a faded patch. "You are late," the human said voice. Almost amused, Carthon tightened his grip on his weapon. "Identify yourself," he demanded. The human smiled, and in that moment the lights failed, plunging the room into darkness. A hiss of venting gas filled the air. Carthon barely had time to curse before movement erupted all around. Shadows danced, flashes of plasma bolts illuminated brief glimpses of something darting among them. He turned in time to see Dulles fall, a strangled gurgle escaping him. Pain lanced through Carthon's chest, dropping him to one knee. His armor was breached, blood seeping through. He felt a whisper at his ear. "You should have run." Then the world went black. Carthon gasped awake, bound to cold metal restraints, his helmet and weapons gone. The room swallowed in darkness. The only sound, the slow, deliberate breathing of another. The human, he spoke calmly, unfazed by the power imbalance. "You are awake." Carthon forced his mind to steady. Panic was death. He asked where he was, receiving only a mocking reply. "A room, my men," Carthon demanded. The human answered obliquely. "They are here, but you are asking the wrong question." Carthon shifted, testing the restraints. Solid, no slack, no weakness. The human circled him, unseen, speaking in that same maddeningly composed tone. "Why are we alive?" Carthon asked, genuinely curious. The human chuckled. "Now you are thinking." Carthon listened, absorbing every nuance. The human was in total control, not desperate, not hurried, utterly confident. "You are Syndicate," the human said, meaning, You are professionals, meaning, someone paid well to have me erased. Carthon offered no response, but the human pressed onward, outlining the futility of the syndicates. Past efforts, assassins sent, assassins lost, yet they persisted. Like an old Earth, saying he mused, repeating the same action, expecting different results. Insanity. Carthon gritted his teeth. What are you? He asked. The human only laughed softly. The only thing keeping you alive. Carthon tested the cuffs again. Useless. Who hired you? The human asked. Carthon remained silent. The human answered himself, the Galactic Federation. He guessed the High Council, fearful that a mere human posed too great a risk to their fragile order. Carthon pieced the puzzle together. The failed assassinations, the scattered rumors, the whispered fears. You are not alone, Carthon said. The human confirmed it. The Federation thought humans isolated, easy to eliminate, but they were wrong. They had underestimated humanity, resilience, their patience, their capacity for collective vengeance. Carthon felt the truth settle like a stone in his gut. This was not a lone survivor. This was a harbinger of something much larger and far more dangerous. The human told him to deliver a message. No more assassins, no more syndicate, no more games. Carthon felt his restraints loosened, not entirely, just enough to signal intent. You are free to go, the human said, his voice carrying a weight heavier than any weapon. Carthon rubbed the blood back into his hands. The darkness still thick around him, he did not dare move, immediately knowing this was another test. He heard Dulles groan nearby, bruised but breathing, others of the squad unconscious but alive, the rest gone. Carthon rose carefully, the injury in his ribs throbbing. He motioned for Dulles to follow. Stepping carefully over their fallen comrades, his rifle and gear were gone, stripped away. Another message: we are not afraid of you, Carthon thought bitterly. It stung worse than the wound. They found their way back to the docking bay, finding their ship miraculously untouched, no traps, no sabotage. The human had left their escape route open, another calculated mercy, or perhaps a warning. They boarded quickly, Dulles firing up the engines without a word. As the ship rose from the colony surface, breaking through the scorched atmosphere, neither spoke. The weight of failure was crushing. Carthon stared into the void, wondering what message his return would really send. Do you think they will listen? Dulles asked finally. Carthon closed his eyes. No. The syndicate would assume this was an anomaly. They would send another team. They would lose again. What happens when the humans get tired of defense? Dulles did not answer, but they both knew. The syndicate ruled from the shadows, manipulating governments, controlling the fates of entire worlds. They believed themselves untouchable, but now they had awakened something they did not understand. Humanity did not forgive. Humanity did not forget. Humanity adapted. Carthon leaned forward, keying a transmission. Buying time. He muttered. Dulles frowned skeptical. You think you can make them hesitate? Carthon stared out into the stars. No, but maybe I can make them think twice, because that is the difference. We play to dominate, humans play to survive. And there is nothing in this galaxy more dangerous than a survivor with nothing left to lose. The ship carried them into deep space, but Carthon knew distance would not save them. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Carthon adjusted the settings on his visor, scanning every broken hallway and collapsed structure of the dead colony around him. The syndicate had thought this would be a routine cleanup, an effortless erasure of a loose end that might threaten their unseen dominion over the galaxy. Yet here they were, moving like hunted prey rather than apex predators. Dulles shifted behind him, muttering under his breath, a low grumble in his native language, filled with frustration and fear. Carthon understood the sentiment too well. The ruins stretched out silent and hollow, soaked with the remnants of conflict, the air still thick with the chemical stink of discharged plasma and charred metal. The standard procedure was simple: locate any survivors, confirm the termination, and retrieve any relevant data. But no one wanted to be on this mission, not after Vray 9, not after what had happened there, where the best assassins the syndicate had ever trained vanished into smoke and blood without so much as a distress signal. Only after charred insignias and broken gear were recovered did the truth begin to leak out. Humans were no longer simple targets, they had become an existential threat. Carthon knew the briefing back on the Syndicate ship had been half lies. Command tried to paint this mission as necessary to reassert their dominance, but everyone knew the real reason they were here: fear and desperation. The scanners blipped again, a flickering signal humanoid. Thermal signature isolated stationary Carthon, gestured silently for his team to spread out and move forward. Their boots barely disturbed the ash underfoot as they approached a narrow maintenance corridor near the colony's shattered power core. Blood marked the walls, not just sprayed randomly, but etched with precision. The Syndicate insignia scratched deeply 5 times, a grim tally of the last team. Carthon remembered the old legends humans had before they left Earth, that certain hunters would mark their kills with notches on their weapons, a badge of honor, or a grim accounting. He never imagined the same ritual would be used against his own. The door at the end of the hall hung half open, the darkness beyond it complete save for the occasional flicker of emergency lights. Their scanners confirmed the human was inside. Carthon held up a fist signaling for a halt, then slowly motioned them to flank left and right, covering the angles. There were 4 of them, trained efficient killers armed with the best weaponry the Syndicate could provide. They should have felt confident, yet an unspoken dread gnawed at the edges of their discipline. This was not the first time a team went in confident and never came back. Carthon took a slow breath, then gave the signal. The door slid open with a reluctant screech revealing chaos. Overturned crates, smashed terminals, the lingering scent of ozone, and underneath it all, a quiet hum of something unseen. The human sat casually on an overturned crate, unarmed at least visibly. His clothes were torn, marked with the faded colors of a Federation jumpsuit. He looked up, at them with a calm that made Carthon's blood run colder than any battlefield ever had. "You are late," the human said casually. Carthon leveled his rifle. "Identify yourself," he barked, his voice tight with controlled tension. The human smiled almost warmly, and then the lights died. The room plunged into darkness, punctuated by a sharp metallic snap, followed by a hiss of gas. Carthon's visor tried to switch modes, but static exploded across his display. He yanked his helmet off, cursing under his breath, relying now on instincts honed from a lifetime of surviving ambushes. Shadows moved around him, but every time he turned his weapon toward the motion, there was nothing there. A gurgling sound from the left Dulles, his massive frame crumpling to the floor. A whisper of movement behind him. Carthon spun plasma bolts streaking through the dark, illuminating brief, horrifying glimpses. A figure darted low impossibly fast. His chest exploded with pain. Armor breached his breath, seized as he staggered, and collapsed. A voice like a breath against his ear, cold and certain, "You should have run." Then the world fell away into blackness. When Carthon awoke, he was shackled, cold metal biting into his wrists and ankles. Darkness pressed in from all sides, his weapons gone, his helmet missing, somewhere nearby, slow measured breathing. Not his own, Carthon forced his mind to steady focusing past the pain. The human spoke softly. "You are awake." His voice was calm, confident in a way no prisoner should ever sound. Carthon demanded to know where he was, but the human only chuckled. "A room," he said mockingly. "My men?" Carthon asked, straining against the cuffs. "They are here," the human said, "but you are asking the wrong question. Why are you alive?" Carthon went still, realizing the truth. There was no desperation here, no panic. This was a human who had absolute control, who knew exactly what he was doing. The Syndicate had prepared for physical resistance, for traps and fortifications, but they had not prepared for this, a predator, who used patience and fear as his weapons. The human circled him, unseen, each footstep slow and deliberate. "Your Syndicate keeps sending assassins," the human mused. "They never come back. You would think they would learn by now?" Carthon said nothing because there was nothing to say. The human continued, softly outlining a history of failures, political maneuverings, covert operations, economic pressure, all attempts to strangle the human problem before it grew too large. And each time humanity slipped to the noose, adapted, survived, grew stronger. Carthon realized then that the human before him was not a mistake, not an anomaly. He was part of something larger, a movement hidden in the shadows waiting for the right moment. The human leaned closer. "You think this is about one man," he said softly. "You think I am alone." Carthon swallowed hard. The Syndicate thought they were the apex predators of the galaxy, but they had never faced prey that hunted back with such cold, calculating precision. Carthon demanded too. Know what the human wanted? The reply was chilling in its simplicity. A message. No more Syndicate, no more assassins, no more games. Carthon felt his cuffs loosen just enough to realize he was being released. He rubbed blood back into his numbed hands but stayed still. This was another test. Trust was not on offer, here only survival. He heard Dulles groan somewhere in the darkness. Others too, breathing alive but broken. Carthon stood slowly, his muscles protesting the movement. His weapons were gone. Aedur, calculated humiliation. They were not seen as threats anymore, merely messengers. He motioned for Dulles to follow. They moved cautiously through the ruined corridors, their senses straining for the ambush that never came. The colony felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by the overwhelming presence of something watching them, judging them, granting them mercy for now. They reached the docking bay, their transport still waiting, pristine, untouched. Carthon hesitated one last time, scanning the shadows before boarding. The human could have destroyed their ship, could have trapped them. Yet he had left it intact. Another message layered atop the first, "Go and tell them what you saw." Carthon strapped into the co-pilot seat, his body aching, his mind racing. Dulles fired up the engines, the ship rising smoothly into the void. As they broke orbit, silence stretched between them. Carthon stared into the endless blackness of space, feeling a cold certainty settle into his bones. "Do you think they will listen?" Dulles asked eventually, his voice hollow. Carthon closed his eyes briefly. "No," he said. "They will think we failed. They will send another team and another until there are none left." What happens when humans get tired of playing defense? Dulles did not answer because there was no answer. Carthon knew the truth already. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. Humanity was no longer prey. They were no longer an inconvenience. They had become something far more dangerous, predators who remembered every slight, every betrayal, every attempt to wipe them out, and who had learned to bide their time. The Syndicate had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated the one species that should never be cornered. Carthon leaned forward, tapping out a coded message to Command A, warning, buying time. He muttered under his breath, hoping against reason that someone somewhere would listen. But deep down he knew it was too late. The humans had been patient long enough, and soon the galaxy would learn what it meant to be hunted by something that refused to die. The ruins of the Federation colony seemed to breathe around them. Every creak of twisted metal, every faint flicker of damaged lighting, whispering of death and defeat. Carthon moved cautiously, his instincts sharpened to a razor edge. He knew better than to trust appearances, especially here where the human they sought was not only alive but waiting. Carthon remembered the last moments before everything went dark. Remembered the glint in the human's eyes, the calm certainty, the whispered warning that echoed in his mind. You should have run. The squad had entered the facility with confidence, armor, gleaming rifles charged and ready. They had numbers, they had training, but none of it mattered because in the end, they were not hunting, they were being hunted. The scanner had shown only a single humanoid signature, but Carthon realized now that a scanner could not measure the deadliest threat the human had not needed. Numbers, not needed heavy weapons. All he needed was fear, precision, and time. Moving through the shadowed hallways, Carthon felt the weight of the past mission hanging over him. The Syndicate had sent the best before and watched them vanish into darkness. Now it was their turn. Dulles limped slightly beside him, favoring one side from the unseen wound he had taken during the ambush. His massive frame seemed smaller, somehow diminished not by injury but by the crushing realization that they were outmatched. Carthon glanced at him, then turned his gaze forward, keeping his rifle low and ready, even though he doubted it would help. Against a foe like this, weapons were almost irrelevant. They reached another corridor, littered with broken crates and shattered screens. The walls bore the scars of desperate fights, and here and there, crude symbols marked where syndicate teams had fallen. Carthon crouched low, scanning ahead. The scanner still showed a single heat signature, stationary, unmoving perhaps, bait or perhaps a message. He motioned Dulles to cover the left as he crept forward. Each step was a deliberate act of defiance against the fear clawing at the edges of his mind. He reached the door leading into the storage area and paused, listening. Beyond it, he could hear nothing, but that was the point. The human knew they were coming, knew they would not stop because their orders demanded confirmation of the kill. Carthon keyed the door open and swept inside. The room was a wreck emergency, lights casting long, distorted shadows. Overturned crates spilled their contents across the floor, and in the center of it all sat the human. He looked the same as before, young, ordinary, wearing a battered Federation uniform, yet there was nothing ordinary about the way he sat, calm, poised, utterly unafraid. "Identify yourself," Carthon demanded again, his voice tight. The human smiled a slow, knowing smile, as if Carthon had asked the wrong question, as if the question itself was meaningless. Carthon advanced slowly, his weapon trained, but the human did not flinch, did not move. He just watched, and then the lights died again. Carthon cursed under his breath, switching to night vision, but static filled his visor, blinding him. He tore the helmet off and relied on raw senses, feeling more than seeing the room shift around him. A hiss of gas filled the air again, and something moved low and fast. Carthon fired blindly, plasma bolts lighting the room in brief stuttering flashes, but he hit nothing. Behind him he heard Dulles grunt, then fall. Carthon spun, searching hard, hammering, then he felt the pain sharp and sudden. Something slamming into his ribs, driving the air from his lungs. He staggered, dropping to one knee. He sensed more, then heard the human approach, heard the soft whisper, "You should have run." Then darkness took him again. When he woke, he was bound again. Metal cuffs biting into his wrists and ankles. His helmet was gone, his weapons stripped. The room was dark, save for a single flickering light far above, casting long, oppressive shadows. Carthon tested the restraints but found no weakness. No slack, no mercy. A slow, deliberate breath nearby signaled the presence of the human. Carthon stayed still, forcing calm into his voice. "Where are my men?" he asked. The human chuckled nearby. "Alive for now." Carthon swallowed hard. "Why are we alive?" he demanded. The human moved closer, footsteps measured and unhurried. "Because you need to deliver a message," the human said. Carthon clenched his jaw. "The syndicate does not negotiate." The human laughed, a low, amused sound. "Maybe not. But you will." Carthon did not respond. There was nothing to say, and the human knew it. "You see," the human continued, "your syndicate thinks power is about control, about fear, but real power, real survival comes from adaptation and patience. Your bosses, they think if they just throw enough force at a problem, it will go away. But they do not understand people like us." Carthon narrowed his eyes. "You are not like us." The human smiled again. "Maybe not, but I understand survival better than they do. Your people made a mistake. They thought humans would break under pressure, that we would submit, but they forgot we are at our most dangerous when cornered." Carthon shifted slightly against his bonds, feeling the edges of hopelessness clawing at him, and he hated it. Hated how much of what the human said made sense. "You are alone," Carthon said, trying to find some crack in the humans, confidence trying to isolate him. "You will fall eventually alone." The human whispered the word like it was a joke. "Is that what you think?" And leaned closer, so close that Carthon could feel his breath. "You think this is about one human, one survivor?" Carthon said nothing because deep down he already knew the answer. "You think we do not talk, that we do not plan? You think we just hide and wait and die alone?" No, Carthon swallowed hard. His mind raced, thinking back over the years. The rumors, the unexplained failures, the whisper campaigns and silent disappearances. The syndicate had assumed they were anomalies, isolated events, accidents. They had been wrong. They had been blind. The human stepped back, giving Carthon room to breathe, but not freedom yet. "We are not scattered," he said softly. "We are watching. We are waiting." And when the time comes, Carthon closed his eyes, feeling the inevitable truth settle around him like a shroud. The Syndicate had thought they could exterminate a problem before it grew. Now they were facing something they could not control. They had forged their own doom, one failed mission at a time. The human leaned down, unlocking the cuffs but not fully freeing Carthon, just loosening them enough to make escape possible, but difficult a calculated gesture. "You will go back," the human said. "You will tell them. No more assassins, no more Syndicate, no more games." Carthon rubbed feeling back into his wrists, staring up at the human silhouetted by the dying light. "And if they do not listen?" he asked, voice low. The human smiled a smile that did not reach his eyes. "They will," he said, "and if they do not, you will not be the first to fall nor the last." Carthon stood slowly, his body protesting every movement. He gathered Dulles with a glance, seeing his second in command, bruised, bloodied, but alive. Together they limped back to the docking bay, moving through the silent ruins. The human did not follow, but his presence pressed against their backs every step of the way. They reached their ship unopposed, the ramp lowering with a hiss. Carthon felt the invisible hand of the human in every undisturbed panel, every untriggered trap. Mercy, granted not out of kindness but as a warning, they strapped in without speaking, Dulles nursing his wounds. Carthon staring into the void as the ship lifted away from the cursed colony. "Do you think they will listen?" Dulles asked finally, voice hoarse. Carthon closed his eyes for a moment. "No," he said. "And that is the problem. They will send another team and another, and they will keep losing until there is no one left or until humanity stops playing defense." Dulles said nothing because there was nothing left to say. Carthon leaned forward, opening a secured channel to Syndicate Command, entering a transmission. Buying time, he said more to himself than anyone else. Maybe enough time to think, maybe enough time to change. But deep down he knew the Syndicate would not change. They would double down, they would escalate, they would lose again. And when humanity stopped playing defense, when they decided to strike back, no power in the galaxy would be able to stand against them. Not the Syndicate, not the Federation, not anyone. Humanity was patient. Humanity remembered humanity would endure, and when the time came, the galaxy would burn. Carthon leaned back against the cold wall of the transport ship, staring out into the empty darkness of space as the engines hummed steadily under his feet. He felt the ache of failure settle deep into his bones, heavier than the injuries that bruised his ribs and made every breath a conscious effort. Dulles sat silently across from him, cradling his injured arm and avoiding Carthon's gaze. Neither of them spoke for a long time, because there was nothing left to say. They had gone in with the arrogance bred by 1,000 successful missions, had walked into the ruins of the Federation colony, expecting to wipe away another inconvenient remnant, and instead they had been dismantled, humbled, and humiliated by a single human. It was not just that they had lost the mission, it was that they had lost the illusion of control. Carthon clenched his jaw, remembering the way. The human had spoken not with anger or hatred, but with certainty, as if every move Carthon made had already been anticipated, planned for, outmaneuvered. They had not been fighting a desperate survivor. They had been playing a part in someone else's script, and they had failed. Carthon tapped a few commands into the console, sending an encrypted report back to the Syndicate Command. He kept the message simple, concise, and brutally honest. Mission failed, human presence confirmed, advising immediate reassessment of operational protocols. He hesitated before sending it, knowing that the Syndicate would not take his advice. They never did. Power breeds arrogance, and arrogance blinds even the sharpest minds. Dulles shifted in his seat, grimacing. "Do you think they will listen this time?" Carthon shook his head slowly. "No. They will think it was bad luck or incompetence. They will send another team, bigger, better armed, more desperate, and they will lose too." Dulles exhaled heavily, staring at the deck plates. "So what happens when the humans get tired of mercy?" Carthon turned to look at him, the question hanging between them like a noose. They both knew the answer. They had seen it in the humans' eyes. Mercy was not weakness, it was a choice, a temporary one. The Syndicate had always believed they could crush any threat with enough force, but force meant nothing against an enemy that understood patience, adaptation, and ruthlessness better than they did. Carthon thought back to the stories he had heard as a recruit long before he ever saw combat. The ancient tales of predators that let their prey grow complacent, fat, and slow before striking the final blow. He realized now that humanity was not fighting a war of survival. They were preparing for a war of extinction, and the Syndicate had just marked itself as a priority target. They had underestimated humans, seen them as disorganized, fragile, easily broken. But they had missed the truth. Humans thrived under pressure. They adapted, they endured, and when pushed too far, they united with a fury that could not be quenched. Carthon rubbed his hands together, feeling the rawness where the cuffs had bitten into his skin, a stark reminder of the power he had been allowed to keep his life, not because he deserved it, but because it served a purpose. A messenger, nothing more. The transport ship shuddered slightly as it entered the atmosphere of the Syndicate outpost world, the lights of the sprawling complex growing larger in the viewport. Carthon straightened, his uniform trying to mask the limp in his step as he prepared to face the debriefing. They would question him, doubt him, maybe even punish him, but none of that mattered now because the truth was bigger than the Syndicate, bigger than him. The galaxy was changing and no one could stop it. They landed with a soft jolt and the hatch opened, spilling harsh artificial light into the cabin. Carthon and Dulles disembarked, moving stiffly toward the command center. Guards flanked the corridors there, expressions blank professional. But Carthon saw the curiosity in their eyes, the unspoken question that passed between them. How had these seasoned operatives failed? He ignored them, focusing instead on the briefing room ahead, where the Syndicate overseers waited, vultures cloaked in authority. They entered the chamber and stood at attention before the central console, where a hologram flickered to life, displaying the faces of the High Syndicate Council. Masked and impersonal report, one of them said. Carthon kept his voice steady. The target was located, confirmed human presence. Hostile engagement resulted in heavy casualties. Target evaded capture. The council members murmured among themselves, dissatisfaction radiating from the holograms. They wanted an explanation, an excuse, something that fit their worldview neatly into the narrative of dominance. Carthon gave them. None. Request immediate operational reassessment, he said flatly. Humans are not to be treated as standard targets. They are evolving. They are coordinating. Another murmur, another wave of dismissive arrogance. Humans are primitive. One of the counselors sneered. They are nothing compared to us. Carthon held his ground, staring straight ahead. Permission to speak freely granted, came the curt reply. He took a breath, choosing his words with care. If we continue underestimating them, we will lose. They are not fighting for power or territory. They are fighting to survive, and that makes them far more dangerous than anything we have faced. Before the room fell silent for a heartbeat, then another counselor leaned forward, barely masking his disdain. You were defeated by a single human. Why should we trust your judgment? Carthon met the gaze of the hologram squarely. Because I saw the future in his eyes, he said, and it terrified me. The counselor scoffed, ending the transmission with a wave. The holograms blinked out, leaving Carthon and Dulles alone in the sterile room. They stood there for a moment, absorbing the finality of it. Then without a word, they turned and left the building, stepping back into the chilled air of the outpost. Dulles broke the silence first. What now? Carthon looked up at the stars glittering coldly above. Because one way or another, the humans would come. And when they did, no amount of Syndicate power would be enough to stop them. We prepare, he said quietly. We survive. It was all they could do anymore. The Syndicate had already declared a war. It could not win, and the consequences would be written in fire and blood. Across the stars, Carthon knew he would not live to see the end of it. But perhaps, just perhaps, he could delay the inevitable for a little while. Buy enough time for some shred of civilization to survive. Humanity would rise, and when they did, they would sweep away everything built on arrogance and fear. They would reshape the galaxy in ways no one yet imagined, and all because a few powerful fools had thought themselves untouchable. Carthon clenched his fists, feeling the raw determination settle into his bones. He would not be a willing pawn in the final act of the Syndicate's downfall. He would fight in his own way, quietly, strategically. He would adapt just as the humans had taught him. In the end, perhaps that was the real lesson. Not about strength or power, but about endurance, about the refusal to break even when everything else crumbled around you. The humans had mastered it, and now Carthon would too. The future belonged to those who endured, and the Syndicate had already proven it could not. The stars above shimmered cold and uncaring as Carthon and Dulles walked into the night carrying with them the weight of a future they could no longer control, and the faint glimmer of a hope that somehow, against all odds, they might yet find a way to survive. Carthon sat in silence in the corner of the outpost barracks, the sterile walls closing in around him as he stared down at the datapad in his hand. The official report from the Syndicate command glowed coldly on the screen filled with clinical language and bureaucratic lies. The mission was labeled as inconclusive, the loss of personnel attributed to environmental hazards and unforeseen resistance. Not a single mention of what had really happened. Not a word about the human who had dismantled an elite team with nothing but darkness, cunning, and patience. Carthon clenched his jaw, fighting down the bitter taste rising in his throat. They had ignored his warnings, refused to see the reality unfolding before them. They would keep sending more. Teams keep making the same mistakes, and humanity would keep surviving, learning, adapting, and preparing for the inevitable reckoning. Dulles entered the room limping heavily and carrying 2 cups of something that passed for coffee in the outpost. He handed one to Carthon without a word and sat down opposite him, his massive frame sagging with exhaustion. Carthon accepted the cup silently, staring into the dark liquid as if it held answers he could not find. Dulles broke the silence first. "They are going to send another team," he said flatly. Carthon nodded grimly. "Of course they are. They think this was just bad luck. They think more firepower and better tactics will solve the problem." Dulles snorted, shaking his head. "They have no idea what they are walking into." Carthon looked up, meeting his old friends, weary eyes. "No, they do not, and they will not until it is too late." They sat there for a while, the low hum of the bass surrounding them, a constant reminder that life went on even as the foundations of their world crumbled beneath their feet. Carthon thought back to the human, the calm, the certainty, the way he had spoken as if the outcome had already been decided. He remembered the flicker of other movements in the darkness, not just the human, but others unseen, unheard, waiting. It was not just one man out there. It was a network, a silent, invisible army, waiting for the right moment to strike. Dulles shifted uncomfortably, setting his cup down with a soft clink. "You think they will actually rise up?" he asked quietly. Carthon leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. "They will when the time is right, and when they do, it will not be a rebellion. It will be an extinction event." Dulles stared at him, frowning. "You really think it will be that bad?" Carthon opened his eyes and nodded slowly. "It will be worse." He stood stretching his stiff muscles and moving toward the window, looking out at the barren landscape beyond the base. The stars glittered in the sky, indifferent and eternal humanity had been. Underestimated, overlooked, dismissed for too long, and now the galaxy would pay the price for its arrogance. Carthon did not know when the final blow would fall, but he knew it was coming. The signs were all there. The quiet shifts, the small disappearances, the subtle sabotages attributed to chance or mechanical failure. But they were not random. They were preparation testing, probing learning. It was the way predators worked, carving out weaknesses before the kill. The Syndicate believed itself invincible, protected by secrecy and fear, but secrets could be unraveled and fear could be weaponized against its wielders. Carthon turned back to Dulles. "We have 2 choices," he said. "We can warn them again and be ignored, or we can prepare for what is coming." Dulles raised an eyebrow. "Prepare how?" Carthon gave a thin, humorless smile. "The same way the humans are, by adapting, by surviving, by being ready when everything falls apart." He did not say what they both knew in their bones. There would be no stopping what was coming, only surviving it if they were lucky. They spent the next few days quietly gathering supplies, weapons, medical kits, portable shelters, anything that might be useful when the syndicate inevitably collapsed around them. They kept their actions subtle, blending in with the normal flow of base activity, but always with an eye toward the exit strategy. They were not planning to fight a war, they were planning to survive its aftermath. The next team sent to the colony was larger, better armed, and more. Arrogant Carthon watched from the observation deck as they boarded their ship, faces hard with false confidence. He said nothing as they departed, offering no warnings this time. There was no point, he knew they would not return. Not all of them, and those who did would come back, broken if they came back. At all, days turned into weeks and the whispers began again. Talk of entire squads vanishing, talk of strange sabotage missions failing for no clear reason, resources disappearing without a trace. The syndicate tried to clamp down on the rumors, silencing those who asked too many questions, but the fear was a virus, spreading faster than they could contain it. Carthon and Dolus kept their heads down, staying unnoticed as much as possible, but they listened. They heard the fear in the voices of seasoned operatives, the uncertainty creeping into every briefing, every mission order. The foundation was cracking, and it was only a matter of time before the collapse became visible to everyone. One night, while Carthon was checking their hidden supplies, a soft chime from his communicator drew his attention. He frowned, recognizing the encryption pattern. Not syndicate, not official. It was an old code, one used by field agents during Black Ops missions. He hesitated, then opened the channel. A voice spoke, quiet, firm, familiar. "You survived," Carthon felt his blood run cold. It was the human. He said nothing, waiting. The voice continued. "We are almost ready. You need to decide where you stand." Carthon forced himself to stay calm. "What do you want from me?" he asked. The human paused, then spoke. A future Carthon sat back, staring at the communicator, feeling the weight of that single word crush down on him. He had spent his entire career serving a system built on power and fear, a system that was now rotting from within because it could not see the threat rising before it. The syndicate would not survive the coming storm. That was certain. The only question was whether he would be swept away with it or find a way to endure. Carthon closed the channel without replying, but the decision was already taking shape in his mind. He would not die for fools. He would not sacrifice his life for an empire, already marked for destruction. When the time came, he would choose survival over loyalty, just as the humans had taught him. Dulles found him an hour later, sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. "You okay?" Carthon nodded slowly, just thinking about what Dulles asked. "Everything," Carthon replied. He stood up, brushing the dust from his uniform and facing his friend. "When the time comes, we leave." Dulles met his gaze, understanding flashing between them without the need for words. No arguments, no hesitation, just a simple acceptance of reality. They spent the next few days finalizing their preparations, moving supplies into a hidden compartment on one of the older transport ships scheduled for decommissioning. They kept their movements casual, their conversations light, but their resolve was ironclad. They would be ready when the collapse came, and it would come sooner than anyone in the syndicate realized. As the days wore on, the base grew more tense, more brittle. Senior officers barked orders with increasing desperation. Missions were launched with half-formed plans and returned with fewer and fewer survivors. The fear was no longer hidden. It dripped from every interaction, every report, every silence. Carthon and Dulles watched it all with grim patience, knowing that soon the dam would break, and when it did, they would slip away unnoticed while the syndicate tore itself apart from within. One evening, as Carthon stood outside the barracks staring up at the stars, he felt a shift in the air, a tension so thick it was almost tangible. Somewhere out there, the humans were moving, preparing, ready to finish what they had started. Carthon took a deep breath, feeling the cold night air fill his lungs. He was ready. Whatever came, he would face it, not as a pawn of the syndicate, but as a survivor. He turned back toward the barracks where Dulles waited, and together they stepped into the uncertain future, knowing that survival would come at a cost, but determined to pay it because in the end, it was not strength or power that decided who lived and who died. It was the will to endure, and Carthan had learned that lesson well from the most unlikely teachers, humanity itself. The days bled together in a haze of tension and silent preparation, as Carthan and Dulles waited for the inevitable collapse of the syndicate. Every report that came through the outpost was a little worse than the last. More teams missing, more unexplained failures, more whispered rumors of human retaliation growing bolder with each passing week. The High Command responded with the same arrogance that had led them here, throwing more resources into the fire, hoping that overwhelming force could still solve a problem that required understanding, not power. Carthan and Dulles kept to themselves, making the final adjustments to their escape plan. They stocked the hidden transport ship with everything they could get their hands on: food, water, medical supplies, communication equipment. They knew they would not get a second chance when the fall began. It would be fast, brutal, and absolute. They would have to move quickly or be crushed beneath the wreckage of an empire too blind to see its own end. Approaching one evening as they sat in the abandoned hangar bay where their ship was hidden, a low rumble shook the ground beneath them. Carthan tensed, instinctively reaching for a weapon that was not there. Dulles stood up, eyes scanning the shadows. For a moment there was nothing, and then the alarms began to scream throughout the outpost, red lights flashing and klaxons blaring. Carthan moved first, grabbing the last crate of supplies and tossing it onto the ship. Dulles followed, slamming the hatch shut behind them. They strapped in as the engines powered up the systems, whirring to life around them. Carthan took the controls, his hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding his veins. Outside the hangar bay, the base dissolved into chaos. Soldiers running, shouting weapons, fire crackling in the distance. It had begun. They lifted off in a smooth arc, clearing the hangar doors. Just as explosions rocked the compound behind them, Carthan did not look back. He guided the ship up through the atmosphere, cutting through the smoke and fire rising from below. They broke free into the void of space where the stars glittered cold and uncaring around them. Only then did Carthan allow himself a moment to breathe. Dulles let out a low whistle, staring at the destruction spreading across the outpost below. "So much for invincible," he muttered. Carthan said nothing, his mind already moving ahead, thinking, planning, adapting. They could not stay near Syndicate space. That much was clear. The humans would not stop until every remnant of the old powers was wiped away, and Carthan had no intention of being caught in the crossfire. They set course for the outer colonies, where the Syndicate's influence was weakest and where survival would be hard but possible. As the ship sailed through the darkness, Carthan thought about everything that had led them here: the arrogance, the blindness, the refusal to adapt. He thought about the human who had let him live, not out of mercy, but as part of a larger strategy, a message, a warning. Carthan realized now that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their numbers. It was their resilience, their ability to learn from failure and to grow stronger because of it. He had seen it firsthand in the way they fought, not with brute force, but with patience and precision, carving away at the Syndicate, piece by piece, until it could no longer hold itself together. Carthan had spent his life believing that power was about control, about fear, about domination. But he saw now that real power came from adaptability, from endurance, from the willingness to change when change was the only way forward. The Syndicate had failed because it could not evolve. Humanity had survived because it could not do anything else. Hours later, when they were far enough from the ruined outpost to risk it, Carthan opened a secure channel and sent a brief transmission using the old codes he had memorized long ago. A simple message survived leaving Syndicate: no pursuit, no return. Then he shut the system down and leaned back in his seat. Closing his eyes for a moment, Dulles watched him silently, then said, "What now?" Carthan opened his eyes, looking out into the endless stretch of stars. "Now we survive," he said simply, "and when the time comes, we rebuild. Not an empire, not a syndicate. Something better if we can." Dulles grunted a sound halfway between skepticism and hope. "Maybe this time we get it right." Carthon allowed himself a small smile. Maybe they set the ship on a long, slow course away from the Syndicate's core, worlds drifting into the outer rim where few dared to go. Life would be harder there, the dangers more immediate, but at least they would be. Free from the lies, free from the chains, free from the doomed cycle of arrogance and destruction. As the stars shifted slowly around them, Carthon thought about the lesson he had learned, one he would never forget. True strength is not about crushing others. It is about enduring. It is about surviving change, adapting to new realities and finding a way to move forward, even when everything familiar has been stripped away. It is about understanding that power built on fear crumbles while power built on resilience grows stronger with every challenge humanity had taught him. That lesson in the ruins of a forgotten colony, in the darkness of a shattered base, and in the quiet certainty of a voice that had needed no weapons to win the fight against all odds, against all logic. Humanity had survived, and now because of that, Carthon and Dulles would survive too. As they disappeared into the void, leaving the broken remnants of the Syndicate behind, Carthon felt a strange, unfamiliar thing stir in his chest, not fear, not regret, but something closer to hope. Hope that maybe the next time someone reached out into the stars, they would build something worth keeping, something that could endure, because it understood what it meant to fight not for power or control, but simply to live, simply to endure, simply to be.